All right, welcome everyone. I'll go ahead and get started with the announcements to start out. My name is Noelle and I'll be moderating tonight's Armed with Faith program. We love hearing from you around the world, so please use the sidebar chat to share where you're joining from. We also ask that you invite others to join my OCN community. We are a welcoming community available any day, anytime, anywhere, and membership is always free. I will also point out that today is Giving Tuesday, so we ask you to also consider making a financial contribution to OCN to support our work if possible, and also consider making one for a friend as a gift or a family member. Today or at any point during the holidays, we're doing our sort of end of year giving campaign. We just want to remind people that we really do rely on donations to keep all of these programs free, including classes, including streaming radio, including interactive programs like this one. So if you're able, please consider becoming a contributor. And of course, we also appreciate everyone who contributes by participating in these programs and by engaging with us. We really appreciate all of you. A few reminders to please be respectful and polite with the opinions of others, both here in the Zoom and on our social media channels. But of course, we really welcome your comments and questions. And this is an interactive program, so feel free to post any questions, whether you're joining us on Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. You can always interact with us. We'd love to see your questions and answer some of them if we can. This program is being shared live on our MyOCN Facebook page and our MyOCN video channel on YouTube. And we will have it available in both of those places as a recording after the program and also on myocn.net so that you can share it with others. The Orthodox Christian Network is a 501c3 corporation and a 100% donor-supported ministry. So thank you again to all of you who support us. And without further ado, I'll turn things over to Father Gary for our program.
Hey, thank you, Noelle. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I know that I did, and thrilled to be here with everyone. Thank you all for the text messages and everything that I got last week asking where the show was. It's good to know that people missed it and that we're here now together again. So tonight we'll start with a prayer, but before I want to just introduce the topic a little bit. Was in Portland a couple weeks ago visiting the parish of Holy Trinity Cathedral and presented a little PowerPoint presentation and opened a great big discussion on Generation Z. And I thought it would be fun for us to share that presentation here, have that conversation, and see where that takes us and what kinds of things we can understand and get out of Gen Z and what we can learn and what we can take away and use to implement in youth ministry as we serve the youth of our church. So with that, let us pray to the Lord. Lord, have mercy. O Lord our God, we thank you for the opportunity to gather. We ask that you bless our minds and open our hearts to understand your gospel teaching, instill in us reverence for your blessed commandments, so that guided and guarded by them, we may attain and give glory to you and for all you do for us. For you are holy now and forever, to the ages of ages. Amen. So Noelle, I'm not going to ask you your age, but I know that we have members of Generation X here because Father Sotuti is a classmate of mine. We're the famous Generation X. We have the millennials, and after the millennials, we have Generation Z. So Generation Z is who we're going to be focusing on now. And what's interesting about all these generations is that as we discuss them, you're going to notice that they all, each generation gets shorter in length. And so what I mean is you'll realize that because what we're going to do in the beginning is play a little game. And so I'm going to open up the PowerPoint presentation, share my screen with you here. And as we go through this this presentation, the first part of it is going to be just a way for us to kind of identify who Generation Z is and what the differences are between the different generations and age categories that we'll be discussing. So we're going to play a generations game. There'll be characteristics that I'll put up here on the screen. If you're here with me, if you're able to put it in the chat, you want to put your guesses in there, or if you just want to shout them out, I'm game with that. I don't know, Noelle, if you are, you're the producer, but I'll let you decide how we're going to go with that. But when I ask a question, go ahead and give your response. And Noelle, if you can check that out. This generation grew up in a time when America was at war. Was this the baby boomers, Generation X, the millennials, or Generation Z? Who do you think that was? In Portland, somebody said all of them, which is very close. the answer is all of them except for the millennials. For the most part, the millennials didn't really see a war. They saw the end of the Vietnam War and they saw the beginning of the Gulf War. But for the most part, baby boomers, Gen X, and Gen Z had wars going on during their lifetimes. The next question, this generation grew up in a time of prolonged peace in America. Well, you know, when I wrote that question, I wasn't really thinking about the order of putting them in. And so that answers the millennials. Not really any wars going on while they were alive, except for, like I said, the end of the Vietnam War. And they saw a little bit of the beginning of the Gulf War there in 1992. This generation grew up in a time of fast-paced technological advancement. That is everyone except for the Generation X. We didn't get to see that. We didn't see very much. We had the TV, we had the television, we had the radio, but we didn't get to see much more of that after that. A lot of that came from 77 to 95, those people when they were born. This generation grew up when racial division was a major topic. What do you think that is? Generation X and Generation Z, huge issue at these days. For Generation Z, we'll get into that a little bit later as well. This generation grew up with parents known as helicopter parents. And I'm gonna talk about that, the fact that it's funny because the millennials are the ones who had helicopter parents. And for the most part, we Generation X are the ones who are those helicopter parents. So we kind of hover over our kids, making sure that they're okay with everything that they do. It's funny today because we're talking about bulldozer parents. So you had parents that hovered over their kids and watched them and made sure that they were protected. But now you have bulldozer parents that kind of go in front of the kids and kind of bulldoze the obstacles out of their way so that they can have it a whole lot easier in life. So those are the generations. So we have the baby boomers, we have Generation X, the millennials, and Generation Z. When was Generation Z born? Generation Z was born basically between the mid-1990s and the mid-2000s. So you can go between 1995 and you can go all the way up to 2010 if you wanted to call somebody a Gen Zer. But after 2010, we're getting into what people are now calling Generation Y. And we'll have to talk about that on another show. But today we're talking about Generation Z, and these are kids born in the mid-1990s to the mid to late 2000s, okay? What do we know about Generation Z? Well, I was very proud of myself for that graphic. I know you're smiling, Noel. But what do we know about Generation Z? They grew up in it during the Great Recession, which is post 9/11. They always remember using Wi-Fi enabled technology. They never ever remember the dial-up. Remember that dial-up tone that we used to listen to? Generation Z doesn't know that sound. They are multiracial in relationships and friendships, and they're considered to be the first post-Christian generation in America. So that's huge, a post-Christian generation in America. It affects their faith and the way in which we have to respond to catechizing them and bringing them into a closer understanding and relationship with Christ and his church. What else do we know about Generation Z? We know that they grew up and grow up a whole lot faster, but what's really interesting is that they stay younger a whole lot longer. Okay, so if we can understand that, they grow up faster. So you have 8-year-olds who act like 13-year-olds, but they stay younger longer. So you have 26-year-olds who act like 18-year-olds, okay? So because of that, they grow up fast. They lose their innocence a whole lot sooner. And there's a huge confusion about God. And they're leaving the church. Last time I remember checking the statistic, said that 6 out of 10 of our kids graduate high school, leave to go to college. They leave the church essentially, and they never come back. Now, when I was a young priest 20 years ago, we used to say, well, when they get married or when they have kids, they're going to come back. But now we're not seeing them come back. They're leaving and they're not coming back, not even when they get married or when they baptize their children. It's an issue for the church. Some of the movies that they watch is interesting, and we can learn a lot from the movies that are made during their time in this generation. The Hunger Games, Katniss's mom, she suffers from anxiety and depression. And as she suffers from anxiety and depression, Katniss has to become the mother and supporter of her siblings. As she does that, she volunteers to tribute her life, to fight for her life. And inadvertently, she starts a rebellion, okay? When we look at Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and The Last Jedi, we see that Rey is abandoned as a child. She uses the Force to fight against the First Order and the dark side. She doesn't know her parents, and she has a strong connection to the Forces, right? So you have another flawed hero there who is kind of forced into something that she really doesn't want to do, but she kind of has the responsibility and feels that she has to do it. The Avengers, all of them here are kind of fighting against the powers that they have, wanting to keep from having to have that responsibility. In the Divergent series, if you haven't seen it, Trish Pryor is our main character. The population is divided into types of working and living, right? And as they work and live, they have to stay true to their types. Well, Trish doesn't like her type. She doesn't fit her type. So she leaves her parents' way of life, and she chooses to join and lead the rebellion to overthrow the type system. In each of these movies, you can go back and look at these movies and these films and these series, and you see that all of the main characters are fighting feelings of isolation, fear, and anxiety. All of the main characters here are outcasts, but they're talented, they're cunning and smart. A lot of them are pushed to lead when they didn't feel ready to lead. They're kind of forced to the front and have to do those things that they're not necessarily willing to do, but do them because it's for the greater good. These people found their identity and true love by joining the rebellion to overthrow an uncompromising and abusive governing authority, right? So you think about the dark side with Rey, you think about the types system with Trish Pryor in the Divergent series, so you get that understanding. Here is a classic shot of what we would see the Generation Z looking like, sitting all together, looking at their phones. What are they looking for as they're going through life? They're looking for a hero, and they believe that they can be that hero. Generation Z, for the most part, has known war all of their lives, okay? It's been something that's been part of their lives all of their lives. If they were alive for 9/11, they don't remember it. And mass shootings are not unusual to them. Remember that Columbine incident back in 1997 when we were just scratching our heads? Generation Z is used to that. Nothing new to them. This is the first generation to grow up with streaming options. Think about it. Look at all the different things that they get to watch, they get to choose from, and they get to watch it right away when they want. Do you remember having to wait till Saturday night to watch Different Strokes? Remember when we had to wait a whole season for the new Dallas to come out? Remember the season finale of Dynasty? Remember when Fonzie jumped the shark in Happy Days? These kids don't have to wait. They're the first generation to grow up with streaming options, all kinds of different things that they get to watch. This makes them truly digital natives, meaning that they grew up with all these streaming options. They're the digital natives that understand this technology. With all of this technology, they're less comfortable with face-to-face conversations. They have a really hard time talking to people. They really do. When was the last time you saw that? Group of kids sitting together, they're all texting each other. And what happens when you ask them, hey, what are you guys doing? So we're talking to each other. Well, I don't hear you talking. Well, we're texting each other. Well, why don't you talk out loud to each other? The response, we don't want everybody to hear what we have to say. They're able to communicate with certain members of the group and still think that they're holding an intimate conversation here amongst themselves. All this technology leaves them with more loneliness, more depression, and more anxiety. So let's talk about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that Generation Z has. Let's talk about their strengths first, okay? These are some great qualities that they have. The strengths of Generation Z are that they are strong-willed. They know what they want. They really know what they want. They know what they want. They're independent. They know how, if they wanted to do it on their own. They're creative and they're willing to think outside of the box to get things done. Now, there's a great story here I'd like to share about a toothpaste company who was shipping out cases of toothpaste. And they realized that every now and then there would be an empty box of toothpaste in the cases of toothpaste that they were sending out. And their customers were getting frustrated when they would find an empty box of the toothpaste in the case of toothpaste. So they spent over $8 million to try to figure out how to make sure that an empty box of toothpaste wouldn't make it into the case with all the other toothpastes to get shipped off to their customers and to the grocery stores and drugstores that they have. After they spent the $8 million, they hired a young Generation Zer to oversee the line. And it was his job to grab the empty box as the machine explained for the machine and the assembly line identified the empty box. The Generation Zer was to go pick up the box and toss it. When they realized what a great success this had been, they went down to the assembly line to see how the young person was doing it. And when they got down there, they saw the young person sitting on a stool looking at their phone. And they wondered what is going on here with the young person sitting there, and how are we being successful? What they realized was this young person went to a hardware store, picked up a $20 fan, set it up at the end of the assembly line, and the fan would blow the empty box off the belt so that that empty box didn't make it into the case with all the other boxes of toothpaste. But they spent $8 million to have a study done. They expect excellence and always want authenticity. This is really important for those of us who are youth workers. They expect excellence and they want authenticity. They want things to be perfect. They want things to be right. They want things to be great. And they want us to be honest with them. They want us to really kind of shoot straight, which is kind of difficult because there are some really tough issues that they have questions about that the church really hasn't identified yet. What are some of their weaknesses? Well, we've already said that they have a lack of face-to-face relationships. They're not good at that. They generally have a lack of patience. This is the generation now that gets to watch their favorite episodes one after the other. You know, one episode of Squid Games ends and they only have to wait a few seconds before the next episode begins, right? They're emotionally unstable without a strong support system. This is where the church becomes very handy and very important for this generation. They are biblically illiterate. They really, really, really have never opened the Bible to understand it, to look at it, to read it. I mean, honestly, have you asked a group of kids to open a Bible to go to John 3:16 and they look around and say, well, what page is that on? They have a difficult time doing it. What are some of the opportunities that we have with Generation Z? They potentially have the greatest ceiling of global influence. What does that mean? They can really change the world. They are looking for a hero. They're hurting and looking for answers. These are great opportunities because they're opening themselves up, because they're hurting and looking for answers. They're looking for a hero. They have great ways to change and have global influence. They are hungry for strong role models. That's us, guys. They see the problems and want to be a force of change. What are some of the things that threat Generation Z? They're over dependent upon technology. Without technology, they're really lost. Like I said, John 3:16, what is it? They can simply Google it and tell you what John 3:16 is. But to open a Bible, they'd have a difficult time doing that. They must find a healthy way to communicate and cope with their feelings of insecurity, anxiety, and depression. You know, we keep giving them pills after pills after pills. And at one point, there's not going to be a pill to cure everything. The immediacy of technology influences how they relate with God, right? Think about it. When you tell them to pray about it and to dwell on it, this is a generation that wants their answers now. They want their answers quick. They want their answers immediate. So here are 4 good ways that we can interact with Generation Z. The first one is we need to be authentic. They want us to be true. They want us to be genuine. They want us to be authentic. If you really care, you ask the right questions, be ready to listen, to pay attention, and to see what they have to say. 2, be patient. Be very, very patient with Generation Z. It's interesting because if you realize it, if you ever worked with a group of Generation Zers and you ask them to clean something up and you point at a pile of trash and you say, pick that up, they're going to pick up whatever you're pointing at. They're not going to pick up the whole pile of trash. They're going to pick up the one piece of trash that you're pointing at. And when you ask why, they're going to say, well, because you didn't say all of the trash, you said just the trash. When my mom said wipe the windows, to me, that meant wipe them clean, right? Unless you're specific with Generation Z. I'm not saying about all of them. I'm just saying mostly. If you tell them to wipe the windows, they're going to wipe the windows. They may not be clean. If you want them to be clean, you got to say, make the windows crystal clear. Make them sparkle. You have to be steady. You have to be firm in what you're going to say and follow through on what you're going to do. And they love it when we ask questions. They want us to ask questions. 3 ways to support Generation Z. Pray, pray, pray. Now, I don't like it when speakers do that. So when I say pray, I mean pray that they find true love and authenticity in a relationship with Christ. Pray that they find new and creative ideas that use technology to connect them to the church. And pray that they will have strong, godly role models in their lives. They need prayer. They need to find a relationship with Christ. They need to find and discover ways that they can use technology in the church and have strong, godly role models in their life. Skills to help Generation Z succeed. Self-leadership. We need to teach them how to take care of themselves. We need to explain to them why it's important to take up the role of leadership and to step forward and to implement those ideologies and characteristics. We need to help them connect with others. Yes, they know how to connect with technology, but we need to teach them how to connect with others and how to have true, authentic relationships. We need to teach them how to lead others. They need to be able to lead others without, being the boss. I think that a good Christian way of saying that is servant leadership, teaching them servant leadership. What surprises you about Generation Z? It's a question I want to bring up as we move away from the PowerPoint and open discussion on the show. So what surprises you about Generation Z? And do you find it hard to interact with Generation Z? Why? And then I want to know about what ideas you can share to reach the first post-Christian generation of America. If you have any ideas, please share them with me at frgaryk. I'm sorry, not frgaryk, frgary@sanfran.goarch.org. That's frgary@sanfran.goarch.org. Thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and come back to you, Noel. And hopefully in that few moments, there were some questions that may have popped up, and we can open this up for some conversation now. It's really important that we have these conversations, these understanding of who Generation Z is and what it is we can do to help them come into the church and have a great authentic relationship with us and with Christ himself. So with that, are there any questions, Noel?
Yeah, there are a few questions. So one, you mentioned biblical literacy. I think putting in my own addition to this question, I think that's also true of millennials, at least from my experience. I know plenty of people that grew up in the church and don't know the books of the Bible, don't know the major stories. And that's, to me, that's a failure of the previous generation of teachers. I think that the Bible is it can be intimidating, to say, just pick it up and read it is intimidating. People don't know where to start, and it's pretty dense, it's pretty difficult. So I guess my question in that would be, what do we do about it? How do we can't just tell Gen Z they need to read the Bible more. I think, that obviously, I think people that I know that are around my age feel ashamed of not knowing the Bible, but feel too intimidated to start without some guidance.
Yeah, so what's interesting about the Bible and Orthodox Christianity is that if we stick to only the gospel readings that we read on Sundays or during feast days, we're going to miss a whole lot of other messages in the Bible. There's going to be a whole lot of messages that are neglected and things that we don't get to discuss. For example, the woman who finds the lost coin is often used a lot in reference to the prodigal son. However, we never hear that story read aloud in our churches, right? We hear the prodigal son read, every year during the Triodion, but we never really hear the story of the lost coin. What I'm getting at is that if we don't encourage them to read the scripture, the only scripture they're going to get is what they hear if they go to church on Sundays, or if they listen to the Sunday services online or elsewhere. And having that understanding of scripture and reading scripture and knowing what it means and how it applies to our life is really important. And one thing that you'll notice a lot of mainstream Christians do is that they'll use scripture as a weapon and use it to offer a point in an argument, right? But we're not allowed to do that. We're not able to do that because scripture goes from verse to verse and ultimately builds on a chapter, and it goes from chapter to chapter, right? So in order to understand the story of the Good Samaritan, you have to read why Christ was telling that story. I bring that up because of the last show where we talked about the Good Samaritan. In order to understand the Mary, or Martha, Martha, you were very troubled and anxious about many things, you have to go back and realize that was said, that happened right after the Lord finished the conversation about the Good Samaritan, right? And you think about that, and you think about the order of these things, and you wonder, well, Martha just heard the story of a man who did work to help his neighbor, and now Mary is just sitting at the Lord's feet. So you think that Martha has ammunition to go to the Lord and say, tell her to get up and help me to do some work, right? And so that's why it's important for us to get them to read it. Now, it can be very intimidating. That's the word that you used, or the person that asked the question. Yeah, everything is intimidating until we get to understand it, right? Somebody who's gonna play on a sports team is going to be intimidated by the people who are better than them until they get better at it. The person who's going to run a marathon is intimidated by 26 miles until they get used to running the 26 miles. So we have to figure out some sort of way to get them encouraged to read scripture and to want to have an opportunity to develop a good habit of reading scripture.
I'll just follow on from that. I think a lot about encouragement and about sort of behavior design. And one big factor there is giving people success early on, like helping them to have success if they do feel encouraged. I think like you said, it's always intimidated to start. If you showed up to a sports practice and you never played the sport before, that's obviously terrifying, especially if the other people are better. But if somebody helps you master a skill, that first day, even if you're the worst person on the team, I think you'll feel like you're excited to come to the next practice.
Yeah, I think, and I think that's very important. What you nailed there is relationship, right? And it's all about relationships. And if you can develop that relationship, it gives somebody the confidence to know that they're valued and that it's important for them to be part of it. And then what they take away from it is the opportunity to move forward and to do the work on their own, which is what we want them to do, right? So you take an example of a youth event that I was at a few Sundays ago, where the kids went station to station and they practiced basketball drills. And to the naked eye, it would look like, well, how is this youth ministry if the kids are just practicing basketball skills? But what was happening was there were relationships being built amongst the coaches and the children and the youth that were organizing the events and running the different drills. And at the end, the priest tied it all together by saying, we're all one church. And when we come together and we work on our basketball skills, we're also working on our interpersonal relationships, and we're building from that. And so that's what happens when you invest in somebody, at practice, you make them feel valued, you give them some work to do and allow them to develop that way. You encourage them to do the work off the court as well.
But one of our Facebook commenters pointed out that in addition to having gone through a lot of change in their lives, Gen Z also has the experience of, at least in the United States, almost all members of Gen Z have two working parents. If they have two parents, they probably both work. So they're very busy, and that probably has an impact on them, both their anxiety level and the way they navigate the world to some degree alone, because there isn't somebody that can always be there.
Yeah, it's true, and that's where the independence that they develop comes from. But it's also where a lot of their I think that as parents, there's a lot of times where we might feel guilty, and where we come out and we help them do things that they should know how to do, right? I'll give you a great example. There was a story that I read recently in the paper about a mother who let her two kids, a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, walk to a local park. And to get to the park, they have to cross a major street. And a neighbor at the park realized that the kids were there without a parent and called the police. The police came and got the children and took them back to their home. And a few weeks later, the parent let the kids do it again, go off and play the park, which is totally normal to me, right? When I was a kid, the rule was come back when the streetlights go on, right? And so here today, though, if a kid shows up at the park without a parent, we get a red flag goes up in our head, right? Like something bad is going to happen. And somehow, some way, we got to figure out a way to get back to that sort of responsibility age for our kids to be able to develop some of their leadership skills and to make decisions on their own and to navigate the world in a way that allows them to make mistakes, fail from them, but then learn how to succeed later on.
Now, when you put up the slide about what surprises you about Gen Z, I don't know if it's surprising, but it's interesting that I think Gen Z is very critical and I mean that in a positive way. Like they're looking for, as you said, they want that authenticity. They're looking for inconsistencies. And I think what you said just now about parents stepping in out of guilt, I think not only does it not help, it's also not effective, because even if there's, I think that the youth or the kids in that situation see that you haven't been paying attention and you've just stepped in to try to fix it or counter it,
Well, yeah, and my wife's a kindergarten teacher, right? And she laughs often when she gives homework to the kids and they bring it back, and she knows when the kids did it and when the parents did it, right? If it's a mosaic and it comes back with like 10 Fruit Loops glued in, 11 different spots, she knows that the kid did it, and that's the whole point. But when it comes back and everything's perfectly lined up, she knows that mom or dad did it. And you wonder why we do that, why we don't let our kids just, do and participate in those ways and in those means in order to understand and to do it. How about the kids that do their homework and forget it at home and don't bring it, right? How many of us have rushed out of meetings to go home to get the homework for our kids to make sure that we turn it in? Whereas, my parents would have said, tough, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. You forgot. And that's the way of learning. We don't want our kids to have to go through that suffering. And so that's where the helicopter parenting comes in. a lot of times. Nowadays, you're having even more so of that, where we, like I said earlier, it's bulldozing parenting, right? Where we're going ahead and making sure that there are no challenges and no stumbling blocks in the way for our kids so that they can just glide right through. And a great example of that is the entrance admission scandal in the universities that took place a few years ago, right? That the parents that had the means were doing what they could to allow their kids to get accepted into schools illegitimately.
So taking a little bit of a different turn based on another social media question, you mentioned, and of course we're all aware about all of the hot button issues, whether political or social, that Gen Z is dealing with, is thinking about. And those of us who don't have regular contact with young people might mostly understand this conversation that's happening from what we see in the media, but you're somebody that's working with kids directly. So what issues are kids actually bringing up to you?
You know, these are hot button issues, and I'm afraid we're not going to have enough time once I start bringing them up and how to discuss them and how to bring them up. But this might be the place to bring them up. But this generation really wants to talk about gay marriage, right? This generation wants to talk about homosexuality. This generation wants to talk about hypocrisy. They want to talk about, who's telling the truth and who's lying, and why is what we're doing the truth, and why is it that you're preaching this but you're doing something different and in contradictory to what you're doing, right? This generation is much more accepting of things that are a little bit we were afraid of back in our day, right? Where we thought we were a little bit more distinguished, right? In our thought process and our quenching things. They want to talk about these things and understand, well, why is it that this can't be, and how are you going to tell me that that I chose to be that live in that sort of way? So yeah, there we go. We've hit a nerve, right? And so Matthew has a question. To be quite honest with you, I'm nervous with the direction we're going to go right now. So let's see what Matthew's question is. Matthew.
Hey, so it's not necessarily a question, but I am actually 22, so I'm a part of Gen Z. I thought it might be good for me to attend. Thank you very much, Father, for hosting this. You're talking about some of that stuff, and you're talking about sort of how Gen Z is sort of lost in without technology, spiritually speaking, and there is a lot of that, with this. You mentioned emotional literacy. Most of my friends, most folks I know my own age, are so beyond spiritually hopeless. They don't know what to do spiritually. It's all doom and gloom. And I think I'm not sure if you're familiar with Nietzsche, but one of the things he talks about is willing meaning into things, and that is what our culture has sort of put my generation into a position where we have to make up our own meaning. And so I think that's where you have a lot of those movements. Why can't we, you're talking about gay marriage, for example. Why isn't that okay? This is, it gives them meaning. And so I think you have an opportunity to give folks my age, real substantive, real substantial meaning that comes from outside of themselves, and not just simply, what they feel at any given moment.
I appreciate that, because we're talking about a society these days where whatever you feel is right. You understand what I'm saying? Like whatever you feel to be right is right, and that's your right that's your privilege in being able to implement that. Because who says that you're wrong, and who says that I'm right, and who says that I'm right, and who says that you're wrong, but me, right? And it's interesting because what the Lord wants from us in this lifetime is to be righteous. And what does that mean, to be righteous? It means to be able to be sacrificial. It means to live outside of ourselves. It means to give of ourselves and to be in a relationship with Christ. And what does that mean, to be in a relationship with Christ? It means to take ourselves and be authentic in what we were meant to be as humans, and that is to be in a relationship with God, which means that we are knowing that there's something greater than us outside of ourselves. And I think that when you live in a world that tells you that you need to do whatever is best for you, you live in a world that tells you take, and get it before the next person does. It's kind of contradictory to what the church teaches. And so you're right, Matthew, that there are some messages that go contradictory to what the church teaches, but it's interesting how some of our youth are able to understand it and others get very confused by it and are left out in no man's land trying to figure out and navigate their way through life, trying to be as faithful as they can. I don't know if that answered your question or helped with your situation at all, but I think that what's really important here to understand is that we don't live in a world where there's black and white anymore. We live in a world where there's lots of gray. But then what I'm seeing happening is that not only is there not black and white, but there's my black and white, which is different from your black and white, which is different from her black and white, right? Which means that the gray areas are not really gray areas. They might be somebody else's white areas, somebody else's black areas, and everybody's correct. And so when everybody's correct, who's wrong and who's right? And I can look at it from all kinds of different angles. And one thing that a lot of people like to say is, well, Jesus sat with the prostitutes and the harlots and the tax collectors and the sinners and this or that. And it's, yeah, he did. But when he left there, nobody was the same. Everybody was transformed in their interaction with Christ, right? No prostitute left the side of Christ without being transformed. Look at the woman at the well. She went to the well at the hottest part of the day to get water because she knew nobody else would be there. She knew she wouldn't scandalize anybody. And here she runs into a good Jewish boy. And the good Jewish boy tells her all the things that she's done wrong in her life. And what happens to her? She's transformed. She changes, right? Look at, all the tax collectors. Look at Zacchaeus when he's up in the tree and the Lord invites himself to go sit at Zacchaeus' table. What happens to Zacchaeus? He changes his lifestyle altogether. He becomes righteous, right? So what happens when we encounter Christ? We become more godlike. And what does that mean? Is that up to personal interpretation? Who knows? I saw you on mute, Matthew. You're welcome to respond.
Yeah, there's a very clear line, that we have to follow in order to become more Christ-like. So I think that is something that people maybe don't understand is sort of how to find that line and where that line is, especially with a lot of most folks in the West haven't even heard of Orthodoxy, especially around my age. And so with a lot of Protestant sort of groups sort of petering out and, my dad's very strong Southern Baptist and his friends always complain to him about how their children are becoming Unitarian Universalists. And sort of falling in line with that sort of, well, everybody's right, and so I think the big problem is helping people to find that way, that way to become more Christ-like and what that exactly entails.
So Matthew, as a Generation Zer, what does it mean to be more Christ-like? How do you define that?
Well, it brings to mind what Christ says. The most important commandment is to, love each other as neighbors, love each other as you love yourself. And that I think can be twisted very easily and is twisted for my generation, because they think that love is letting anybody do whatever you want. But, I think about my patron saint, Saint Matthew. He realizes what he's doing is wrong, and he leaves it all behind to follow Christ because that's what's right. So it is coming and coming to understand what is right and doing your best to follow it.
Right. No, I get it. I get it. But there are some issues in the church that we have to address, and we have to talk about, and realize what might be a choice, what we think might be a choice may not be a choice, right? And how is the church going to address those things, and talk about those things, and where does the black become black and the white become white in those situations? Because you can't, I'm trying to really walk a fine line here in the things that I'm saying, but it's really, it can be a really difficult situation for a lot of families. And I think that the love of God is greater than any one issue. And I think that the most important thing to remember is that God is love, and that love needs to be shown to everybody. And I think that understanding that love is totally and magnificent and awesome in ways that we cannot describe. When you feel it, you understand it, and you don't understand it at the same time. And so, yeah.
Father, something that my family talked about at Thanksgiving dinner was, how polarized we are in a lot of ways, right? Kind of talking to that black and white. And I think a lot about, our intentions, lack of humility, and sort of the fact that there's no inherent value in being right. And what I mean by that is not that it doesn't matter to know the truth or to do the right thing, but that, if your goal is to be right or to prove that you're right and someone else is wrong, you're always wrong there, because that's not love. And the only purpose of having the truth is, as you said, that relationship, right? Building those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And if you reach out with love, and your intention is actually loving, and you're really just constantly examining yourself, am I attached to the idea of being right here? Do I need someone else to stop making me uncomfortable? Is that why I'm doing this? Or am I actually caring about them? And I think it's really hard to go wrong if you approach from that perspective, but that's the struggle, right? Because it's so satisfying to be right. And it's so satisfying to draw those distinctions.
I'm smiling, Noel, because you've nailed on something that a priest said to me and my wife when we were newly married, and we would argue about the stupidest things, right? And finally, the old priest looked at my wife and I, and mostly at me, then my wife. But he said to me, "Do you want to be right, or do you want to be married?"
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the sort of thing. Like I think about that applied to the situations in life to those people who are not married, right? And like, just think about, do you want to walk around and be right all the time and and what does that get you? Or do you want to be alone and unloved, right? And not that you have to compromise your values and norms in order to be loved or to love. But there's sometimes where, we don't know what another person is feeling and what's going on and what they're experiencing during that time, right? And so I always liken this to, when I work at summer camps and I work in different ministries where young people have to serve other people, and I remind them that, look, when that mom comes to you and yells at you and gets upset with you, she may not be upset with you. She's taking it out on you, right? But it's not about you. Don't let it be about you, and if you look at the Starbucks training manual, that's my dream job is Starbucks, because I would love to make somebody a cup of coffee and then hang my robe up, my apron up, and just go home and clock out and not have to worry about anything. But not the vocation and calling that I had. But Starbucks does a really good job of teaching its employees that everybody walks in those doors with baggage, right? And whatever happens at the counter, I just understand that the customer's not taking it out on you. And I think that if we go through life and realize that, like what Plato said, be kind because everyone you encounter is fighting a battle, right? And it's true. We're all fighting a battle. And I think that when we encounter each person and we realize that every person loves something, is afraid of something, and has lost something, then we treat them a whole lot differently than we would, in any other situation. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I'll second that. I worked in a bakery previously, similar to working in Starbucks, and I can't tell you how many times somebody came in being mean to me or just very rude, and I would never say anything either way. I would just sort of stay calm. And the number of times that people just started crying halfway through being mean to me and telling me that they were in trouble at work or having a bad time or whatever, it's surprising. You really see the full spectrum of human experience working in customer service, but people are going through a lot, and I think a lot of people have lost their support systems that they might have had previously. I think we're very isolated now in a lot of ways, not just Gen Z, but everyone is kind of expected to stay within their immediate family. If they don't have a family, if they if they're estranged from their family, they don't get married, whatever it is, some people end up really alone. That's
yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and I think that might be a topic for another show as well, because that's what leads to loneliness and depression is no real place to kind of plug in. And that's what the church has offered over all these generations, right? All these centuries, the church has offered an opportunity to come and to plug in and to be there. And here we're coming off of 21 months of online liturgical services, and thinking that we're connecting with people. And as great as this is, Noel, you're out in Virginia, I'm here in Southern California, and we're connected through this medium, right? Are we? Are we? You know what I mean? Are we in communion? And you could have an argument in both ways, but I think that our world is lacking communion. I think that we're lacking the opportunity to kind of be together and to do those things. And I think that we're looking for it in every way possible. And I think that our kids, Generation Z especially, is thinking that they're finding that communion, they're finding that connection in their social media platforms, and they're finding it in their social media, groups, and the TikTok and the YouTubes and the kids sitting around in a circle. You saw that picture where they were sitting around in a circle. I said, "What are you guys doing?" And they said, "We're talking to each other." And I was like, "Well, put your phones down and talk." They said, "No, we like it like this." Why? Because I can talk to her without telling her what I'm thinking, right? I can tell her what I'm thinking, but not her what I'm thinking. And it's an interesting way of connecting. Matthew.
Yes. So forgive me, I wanted to backtrack a little bit to something that Noel had brought up, specifically with the biblical literacy. Biblical literacy, I would say, for prior generations was just as much cultural as it was a spiritual thing.
Mm-hmm.
You could bring up Noah, Noah and the ark to anybody from prior generations, and they would know. They don't have to know all the details, but the general idea. I've had situations where I've spoken to friends of mine and made vague, again, Noah and the ark, a pretty famous one, right? And they'll have no clue. They've never heard those words, before in their lives. So I guess my question, Father, is how do you bridge that cultural gap? And how do you move, learning about the Bible from like a purely scholarly, purely like, oh, I'm reading a book sort of thing, to a more intimate sort of connection?
So I hope that when I say this, you don't think that I'm being arrogant, but my daughter several years ago came downstairs and in the morning and saw me reading the Bible, with a cup of coffee. And she said, "How often do you read that book?" And I said, I try to read it every day. And she goes, "Well, when are you going to be done with it?" And I said, "I'm never going to be done with it." and she goes, well, why would you read the same book over and over again? And I said, because this book never changes. It's the living word, right? It's different every time. And I think that that's the example that we have to give to our youth. And I think that that's what Generation Z is looking for when we talk about godly role models, is that they need people to teach them to realize that there's things that just are biblical truths that just go on forever. The story of the Good Samaritan. After that show a couple weeks ago, Noel can attest to this as well. The questions that we got on social media and the questions that we got through email and text and all over the place were, we could do a whole season just on the Good Samaritan, just talking about the Good Samaritan in and of itself, a story, within a story that tells the story, right? And when you think about that, you talk about that, then you move on to another story, the prodigal son, and that's another story within the story that tells the story. And so how do we deal with that kind of illiteracies? We just really need to talk about it and to examine it and talk about where people's priorities are, right? And I didn't want to go there, but priorities are a whole lot different in different households. And a lot of times we say to parents that we need to always talk about God to our kids, always talk about God to our kids, always talk about God to our kids. Well, what's important, my wife says this all the time, is she says, at one point we need to stop talking about God to our kids and start talking to God about our kids, right? That our kids have heard about God, but now it's time to just tell God about our kids and pray for them and ask, for their hearts to be opened. And I think that that's what needs to happen. Now, I'll tell you something funny, Matthew. Last weekend in Portland, I did my famous, sort of Old Testament kind of joke where I, went on and on about the Old Testament and about the animals that were on the ark and this and the ark and that in the ark and on and on and on. And then my question was, how many animals did Moses take on the ark? And usually people say, well, he took 2 of every animal. And I said, well, did he really? And they're like, yeah. I said, he took 2 of every animal. And yeah. And then one kid, was listened to the question. He said, you guys didn't listen to the question. He said, how many animals did Moses take on the ark? Moses didn't take any animals on the ark. It was Noah that took the animals on the ark, right? So it's all about, that listening component and that understanding component and realizing that there's teachable moments there and to understand, I don't know if I'm answering your questions or just going backwards, but I think that there's a whole lot of information here we can talk about, and we can talk about how to engage our kids with the Bible and to tell them stories and to get them to understand, that ultimately at the end of every gospel, especially the gospel readings in our liturgical cycle, it's about relationship. It's about what the relationship is between us and God and us and each other and us within ourselves, and how we are going to apply the love of God in those relationships, right? And so we go on out, we leave the liturgy and we start the liturgy, and we try to figure out how we're going to make God real in the world that we live in. And that's the whole point of youth ministry as well, is making God real in the lives of our youth and the people that we encounter. We're hitting 5 o'clock, Noel, and I thought that we were going to struggle to get there. We didn't, so thank God. But next week, I'm really excited. I'm going to have a young man named Lucas Paris on the show. Lucas is a freshman in college and is finding and navigating his way through a Protestant college down at Grand Canyon University. We're going to talk to him about that and what his experiences are like leaving his Orthodox Christian home and going to a Protestant college and finding how other people encounter a relationship with Christ outside of the Orthodox community. So that should be fun next Tuesday.
And other programs coming up, I'll just go ahead and announce those now. We've got Living Icon tomorrow night. That's with Father John Vlahos, talking about relationships and how to be spiritually mature Christians as we encounter people in our church communities and our family and friends. We've been having some great conversations about relationships going into the holidays, which I know can be a difficult time. So definitely tune in for that. And then on Thursday, we have Father Stavros back talking about We are called to follow Jesus Christ is the title of the series, and talking about getting back to the basics, since a lot of people have been gone from church for over a year. Some people are back, some people are not. How to reintegrate into church life, how to reintegrate into, what it even means to live a Christian life, to live a life in the church. So we'll be talking about that. And then, as Father Gary said, we'll be back next Tuesday with another program. Any final thoughts, Father?
No, I'm always thrilled at how these conversations develop and manifest during this hour. And if you have any ideas, by all means, send them in. If there's something you want to talk about, especially something that we may have heard or said during this hour that needs to be explained a little bit further, by all means, please share those. You can send them to Noel at myocn.net, or you can send them to me at frgary@sanfran.goarch.org.
And I'll end on a funny note. We have one of our Facebook commenters said that at her child's school in kindergarten, the teacher started giving the parents the grade instead of the student if they could tell.
That's great.
So everyone remember to please keep your macaroni art authentic.
Keep it authentic. That's great. I love it. Love it.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
You too. God bless. Through the prayers of our holy fathers, O Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen. Take care. Good night, Noel. Thank you for